best Lincoln cent varieties that you can look for from 1941. For this date, there are essentially 3 varieties that are worth pursuing. The first of these has some strong doubling on the obverse of the coin, the result of rotated hub doubling, but here the first hubbing was set very shallow, which explains why the doubling only displays on parts of the design. First, look at the letters of Liberty. Due to the counterclockwise rotation, the doubling should display towards the top of the letters. The B, E, and R of Liberty are definitely the strongest indicators, where the doubling should be quite obvious. From there, the letters of In God We Trust are also doubled. Here, the doubling displays towards the right of the letters. The letters of In God are doubled mostly towards the lower half of the letters. However, the letters of Trust are more severely doubled. The same amount of spread, but the doubling is just more obvious, I suppose. An example of this coin, graded as MS66 Red by PCGS, was sold at auction in 2023 for the sum of $1,800. The second variety is, again, a double die obverse variety, but on this example, the doubling displays in a very different manner when compared to the coin that we just looked at. And again, this is a 1941 penny from the Philadelphia Mint, so no mint mark on this coin. The letters of Liberty has only minimal doubling on it, mostly in the form of separation lines. Best seen on the B, but again, this is very faint. The best doubling is seen on the letters of In God We Trust, and unlike the previous coin, the doubling here is very strong and the entire letter is doubled. The spread is fairly wide as well, with the doubling displaying towards the right of the individual letters. There is also some more subtle doubling on the date. Here, the 4 of 1941 has some separation lines along the horizontal bar. During 2023, a PCGS graded MS66 Plus Red example of this variety coin was sold at auction for $5,040. Our next 1941 variety penny to look for is, again, a doubled obverse variety, but this time it was a result of offset hub doubling instead. The initial squeezing of the hub was very weak, and the doubling on the date is a good indication of this. There is doubling on the upper left-hand curve of the 9 that you can see towards the southwest, with the first 1 of the date displaying similar doubling as well. But the best doubling on this example is the doubled earlobe that also is seen just to the southwest of the final position. In 2023, a coin like this was sold at auction, graded by PCGS as MS66 Red for the amount of $5,040. Lincoln penny varieties from 1942. The first coin to look at is this 1942 penny from the Philadelphia Mint. So that means no mint mark on this one. That has some interesting doubling on the obverse of the coin. The clearest doubling is to be found on 2 places on the design. First, look towards the date, where you can clearly see doubling on the number 1, and to a much lesser degree on the 9 as well, towards the northeast in both cases. There is then also some further doubling to Lincoln's eyelid in much the same orientation, just towards the top of the eye. In 2024, an NGC graded example of this variety was sold at auction for $1,440 at a grade of MS66 Red. The next variety displays its doubling very nicely on the letters of Liberty. It appears as though the first hubbing attempt was slightly weak, but the spread is sufficient enough to compensate for that in this case. The letters are doubled towards the top, almost across the board, although the letters with flat horizontal sections do display it better, like the B, the R, and the T. In 2023, an example of this coin, graded by PCGS as XF40, was sold at auction for $600. Then, moving right along to the third example now from this single issue, we have another doubled eyelid coin to look for. In fact, the 1942 penny has quite a few similar variety coins out there to look for. But in addition to the doubling that displays on the eyelid, in this case almost directly towards the east of the main design, there is also additional doubling on the letters of trust, especially on the first T of that word, where the doubling is seen directly towards the right of the letter. This coin graded as MS65 red by PCGS and was sold at auction in 2023 by Great Collections for $1,792. Then we have one more variety from the Philadelphia Mint before we move on to the branch mint coins. The doubling on this coin is again on the obverse of the coin, with most of the doubling seen in a general northeastern shift. We'll start with the date, where the 1 and the 9 are slightly doubled towards the top of the numbers. Moving upwards along the design from there, you should be able to see the effect of the doubling along the ridge of Lincoln's nose as well. And here, true to form, is again some doubling on the eyelid, this time in the northeasterly direction though. And then finally the top of the head, or more specifically the hair, is doubled as well, as indicated here. For this coin, we can find an example that was sold at auction in 2023, graded by PCGS as MS65 red and sold for the sum of $3,000. From there, we head towards the Denver Mint, and if you've heard enough about double dies, then you're in luck, because true to form for a branch mint variety, this is in fact a repunched mint mark coin. In this case, the D over D variety sees the remnant of the initial D due north from the final placement, with just the uppermost portion of the initial impression still detectable. In 2023, this coin, graded by PCGS as MS67 red, was sold at auction for $840. Another noteworthy repunched mint mark coin from the Denver Mint in 1942 is now also seen here. But on this coin, the variety displays instead towards the west of the primary mint mark, so that the vertical bar of the D is seen in this manner towards the left of the D, and a slight remnant of the initial rounding is also seen inside the cavity of the D mint mark too. In 2023, we saw an example of this variety coin appear at auction, graded by PCGS as MS65 red, for which it saw a closing price of $264. From there, we leave the Denver Mint and head out even further west to find the San Francisco Mint, with a repunched mint mark variety all its own. And to be honest, this is not exactly my favorite variety, as it can be very tricky to diagnose correctly, as it is very dependent on die state. Technically, this is a triple punched mint mark, as in an S over S over S variety, but in most cases only one of the three repunchings will be at least legible. This in the form of a slight mark just about halfway between the tail of the number 9 and the lower serif of the S. Here we can point to an example that was sold at auction in 2023, slabbed by PCGS as MS67 red for the sum of $2,460. From there, we head over to probably at least the most interesting coins on this list. It is both a repunched mint mark and a double die obverse variety at the same time. Talk about an embarrassment of riches on just one coin. Let's start off with the doubling then. The easiest place to spot it will be the date, where the 9 is doubled towards the top. Now, I'll grant you this, it does look suspiciously like mechanical doubling, but I assure you that this is in fact a doubled die, as every example of this coin I've ever come across has had this exact same doubling replicated on each coin. From there, the letters of Liberty are doubled ever so slightly, mostly seen on the horizontal parts of the letters towards the top, like the T, for example. In addition to that, the S mint mark is also repunched. You can see it towards the bottom left, between the lower serif and the top rounding. Now, also, inside the cavity of the S, there's a remnant there to be found. In 2022, this coin, graded by PCGS as MS66 plus red, was sold at auction for the sum of $825. Penny varieties from 1943. Yes, that's right, the venerable steel penny. So a good place to start will be at the Philadelphia Mint, where we have a double die obverse coin to look for. This is an example of class 6 doubling, or stated otherwisely, distended hub doubling. So as such, most of the doubling is displayed simply as additional thickness on the design elements, specifically on the letters of Liberty, where you can see it most pronounced on the vertical portions of the letters, such as the R, the T, and Y. Comparing it to a regular coin, you can see the difference more clearly. From there, you can now move along towards the date, where arguably the doubling is definitely easier to detect. Look towards the tail of the number 9 to see it expressed most pronouncedly, although to be fair, every number is doubled to much the same manner. In 2024, an example of this variety was sold at auction, slabbed by PCGS as MS67 for the sum of $2,280. Staying with the Philadelphia Mint for now, we have a doubled reverse example of the 1943 cent to look for as well. Here, there is doubling evident on the wheat ears, as well as most letters of the reverse of the coin to at least some extent. But it is probably most pronounced on the letters of E pluribus unum. Here, most doubling displays towards the south of the letters, or, well, towards the center of the coin in other way. You should also clearly be able to see doubling on the last several letters of states. During 2023, there was a PCGS graded coin with a grade of MS67 that was sold at auction for the amount of $2,400. Then from there we move along towards the branchment varieties, beginning with one of the most prominent repunched mint marks available, in the form of the impressive 1943 D over D steel penny, where the D was initially impressed towards the southwest of the primary impression, with an extremely broad separation between the two. An example of this coin, graded by PCGS as MS67, was sold at auction in 2024 for the sum of $5,760. The 1943 steel penny has many secrets to reveal to the diligent and determined collector. The 1943 S double die obverse steel cent is one such example. Until very recently, the coin was simply listed as a double die obverse. While this still holds true, but it has since been proven and widely publicized as recently as 2022 that it is in fact a 1943 over 42 overdate variety instead. Most of the clear doubling you can see on this coin is the result of class 5 hub doubling with a counterclockwise spread from a rotation point near the rim along the 9 o'clock position on the coin. And then, as it is furthest away from this point, the date displays the best doubling overall. The 1 is doubled towards the south in unmistakable fashion, but the strongest doubling is clearly found on the number 9, with the tail doubled towards the southeast and the upper curl of that number also doubled dramatically. The 4 shows signs of doubling towards the south of the crossbar. This particular point is strongest in an earlier dice date, but more on that in just a little bit. And then finally the number 3, which shows signs of doubling, or more accurately, the remnants of the underlying number 2 towards the top right, just inside the top curl and below the middle section of the 3 as well. Exactly where you might expect a slightly pivoted original number 2 to have been from the original 1942 hub squeezing. Further doubling can then also be identified towards the east of Lincoln's eyelid. This doubling is already quite strong, but is made all the more apparent when contrasted with a regular non-variety coin as seen here. Less impressive, though still noticeable doubling is also detectable on the inside of Lincoln's nostril, and then a similar effect, also the result of the pivoted hub doubling, can be gleaned towards the right of the lower lip. Then, heading south from there, you should also be able to see more minor doubling on the southern part of the bow tie that looks like a small border all along the bottom edge of this design detail. Now, while there is doubling on the Letters of Liberty, specifically the BERTY portion of the word, it is extremely minor, as this is the nearest to the pivot point mentioned earlier, and you also need an extremely early die state example of the coin to notice any separation lines or anything of note, really, as these quickly become washed out and then simply display as mostly slight additional thickness on the latter letters of that word. Other die markers also include a diagonal die crack that runs across Lincoln's lapel and vest. This appears to be present in all die states, but does become more pronounced in later die states, as you would expect it to be. Similarly, 2 diagonal die lines run south-southeast from the bottom of the letter R in Liberty. This is present in early die states and mid die state coins, but tends to soften and eventually vanish in latter die state coins, perhaps due to simple wear, or more likely the die was polished to sharpen details at some point. Another key die marker are 6 vertical die scratches that cover most of the right obverse field from Lincoln's eye line all the way down to just above the date. Now, while these die lines are present in most all examples of this variety, I have to stress that I have seen an early die state example of this coin, I believe to be genuine, that lacks these particular die scratches, indicating that they must have been the result of some mechanical interference relatively early on in the minting cycle. You'll also notice that the letters of trust in particular tend to become a little more softly defined and washed out, if you will, in later die states, and a small die chip tends to form towards the right of the last letter T. For the sake of completeness, I should, I suppose, also mention that the reverse die for this variety was definitely swapped out at some point, so any discussion of known die markers for the reverse falls outside the scope of this particular presentation, and honestly, in practical terms, aren't really that crucial. A wonderful variety that should be gaining more recognition as a confirmed overdate, and in 2022, a very attractive example of which, graded as PCGS MS67, was sold at auction by David Lawrence Rare Coins for $2,250. Here is a rather spectacular variety from 1944. The 1944 D penny that you see here is an eye-catching and extremely attractive example of what is known as distended hub doubling, or Class 6 hub doubling. This is characterized by an additional or unusual thickness in the design elements, typically displaying in the legend or the date. This coin is no exception to that generalization, with the date being the main place of interest for the variety. The easiest place to spot this effect is on the tail of the number 9 that seems to be getting gradually thicker as it descends. The first number, 4, is most noticeably affected on the bottom stem below the crossbar, where it is almost twice as thick as it really should normally be. And the last number, 4, is also affected in the same manner, but here the top half of the 4 is also extremely wide. The effect of this is most dramatically noticeable when comparing this variety with a normally struck or regular non-variety coin of this same issue. Placing the regular and variety coins side by side, the doubling really does come into sharp contrast. Additional thickness is then also seen on the letters of Liberty, although this is less impressive, mostly displaying as slight cupping or additional thickness on the I and the serifs of the E and the B, making them seem a little more bent out of shape more than anything else, really. More noticeable doubling can then also be seen on the letters of In God We Trust, particularly towards the bottom of the letters. The We is a good example, where the W especially is a good example of this, where the bottom half of the letter is just very chunky, if you will. The U of trust is also a fantastic example of this additional thickness. Die state isn't really much of a determining factor for this variety, so you can largely and safely ignore that aspect, although a die crack does appear diagonally across Lincoln's hair, just about northeast of the ear, that you can use to determine the specific die state of the coin that have, as it is missing in earlier die states, but appears and then progresses as the die state of the coin advances. During 2022, David Lawrence sold a PCGS MS66 red graded example of this coin at auction for $322, which represents about a tenfold increase on the non-variety base coin, definitely making this variety worthwhile searching for. A very attractive repunched mint mark variety is the next coin for us to look for, in the form of the 1944 D over D variety. Here, the initial D mint mark was punched in just slightly north of the final placement. This should leave clear indications of the first mint mark, just towards the north at the top, as well as to the lower serif and the bottom portion of the inside cavity of the D as well. In 2022, a PCGS graded MS64 red example of this coin was sold at auction for the price of $186. The second repunched mint mark variety is not nearly as easy to spot as the first one, but in a sense, it is a lot bolder, as the separation between the two punchings was a lot wider. In this variety, you can look towards the northeast of the mint mark to see what remains of the initial punching of the first D mint mark. Like I said, it's not as clear as the previous example, but you can definitely see that there was a D placed towards the northeast before the final impression was made. In 2021, an MS66 red graded example in a PCGS lab was sold at auction for the price of $1,320. Following on that, the issue also has two very attractive over-mint mark varieties to offer up as well. First in line in that regard, we find the D over S type, where the remnants of the underlying S mint mark can be seen just peeking out from underneath and behind the D. So here, the rounding of the S is seen between the two serifs of the D. The center part of the underlying S is detected inside the cavity of the D, and in most coins, but particularly early die state examples, you should find some indication of the original S towards the bottom of the D as well. In 2019, a coin like this graded as PCGS MS67 Plus Red was sold at auction during the ANA's World's Fair of Money for the price of $8,400. And then we have the best known variety for the 1944 wheat cent, the 1944 D over S over mint mark. Yes, that's right, another one, but this one is far bolder than the coin that was just under discussion. Almost the entire rounding of the initial S, including the top serif, is seen towards the north of the primary D mint mark, with the middle bar of the S clearly impressed to the top of the cavity of the D as well. For this variety, we have an example graded as MS67 plus red that was sold at auction in 2020 for the laudable price of $49,937.50. If you have a 1945 Lincoln penny, then you might want to take a closer look at it to make sure that it isn't a rare variety coin, because it could be the difference between a coin that is worth $1 or $2 and a few $100s. Now, this is by no means the most dramatic variety, but that also gives you the great chance to cherry pick it, since most people can easily miss this one. Let's look at the date first, shall we? Now, the date on this variety coin is doubled. The best place to spot the doubling should be on the top curve of the number 9, and then the horizontal bar of the number 4 is also doubled towards the top, much in the same manner as the 9. And the great thing is that you don't need a coin in a mint state grade. Dirtier old coins that have been in circulation for a bit will also have the same doubling on it too. Then from there, let's move right along to the main attraction for this variety, shall we? This would be the letters of liberty. Now, these are all doubled in much the same orientation as the numbers 9 and 4 of the date. In other words, almost directly towards the north. Here you can look towards the letters that have relatively flat horizontal sections, such as the B, the E, R, and T to see the doubling the best. The B and E are especially good indicators of this in this case, as the doubling can be seen almost across the entire letter. And again here too, in a lower grade coin, the B, E, R, T section is the best place to see the doubling, but especially focus on the B and the E. In addition to this, there is also some minor doubling on Lincoln's ear that can be found to confirm the variety. But by the time that you found the doubling on the date and the letters of liberty, this additional point is really just more of an academic exercise than anything else. Now, the variety was not discovered all that long ago, relatively speaking, and is growing in popularity. With each successive auction appearance, the price does seem to be trending steadily upwards, such as in 2023 when a PCGS graded example with a grade of MS65 red was sold at auction for the sum of $780. Valuable penny varieties for 1946. The first coin encountered in our journey hails from the San Francisco Mint, and fittingly so, it is also a mint mark variety, but not the usual repunched or over mint marks that you might expect, but instead, this time we have a rare example of an inverted mint mark variety. Now, it's admittedly a bit tricky, as, of course, it technically doesn't really matter in which orientation you punch in the S. It stays an S. So how do we know that it is in fact upside down or not? Well, this is mintmark style number 6, or the bold serif S. So named because both of the serifs of the S are particularly round-shaped, which was used primarily in 1944 and 1945, and then on this 1946 coin where it was punched in upside down. If you compare a normal S like this from 1945 penny, then you can see there is a small flat spot right on the lower serif. But on the inverted position on this 1946 penny, the flat spot is at the top. On this variety, the S also tends to be broken on the bottom, either because it was weakly impressed or, more likely so, because the mint mark punch itself was damaged, which would also explain why they stopped using this style in 1946. In 2023, this variety coin, graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, was sold at auction for $408. Then we stay at the San Francisco Mint, because there is yet another mint mark variety to identify. This time, however, it is an over mint mark variety in the form of the 1946 S over D mint mark cent. This is a more classic variety when compared to the inverted mint mark that we just looked at before, where a D mint mark was initially punched into the working die and it was then overstruck with an S mint mark to be coined at the San Francisco Mint. To see the initial D mint mark underneath the S, look towards the lower serif of the S. You should see a little line connecting the inner part of the lower serif with the top rounding of the S. This was the vertical bar of the initial D. The very top of the D and a portion of its rounding can also then be detected inside the top opening of the S, as the initial D was actually struck in quite low as well. In 2021, a PCGS graded MS66 Plus Red example of this variety was sold at auction for the sum of $2,400. Lincoln cent varieties that you could look for from the 1947 penny. The first coin is a product of the Philadelphia Mint. So that's the one without the mint mark on it, and it is a doubled obverse variety, the result of a clockwise rotation during the hubbing process. The doubling displays to a more limited degree on the date. The 7 is especially pronounced in this regard, with almost full doubling on the flag of the number, and very nice notching towards the top left. But the 4 should display some doubling as well, mostly in the form of separation lines though. The problem is that this might not be detectable in lower grades. As you can see here, you can barely make out the doubling on the 4 on this coin, but the doubling on the 7 is still detectable. Now, there is much stronger doubling on the letters of In God We Trust, displaying towards the left of all of the letters in this case. Looking specifically at the letters of trust, the R, U, and the top rounding of the S display this aspect the clearest. And again here, this should remain fairly legible on even lower grade coins as well, making it a much better point of interest for the 1947 penny to try and find the doubling. In 2023, this example of the coin, graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, was sold at auction for the sum of $660. From there, we can head over to the San Francisco Mint to find an extremely underrated repunched mint mark variety. This 1947 S over S variety is a little bit sneaky, as it might not be immediately apparent what you are dealing with. But this is actually two different mint mark styles punched in over top one another. The first punch was done with a trumpet tail S, classified as mint mark style number 4, which was then repunched with mint mark style number 7, better known as the sans serif S mint mark. You can see the evidence of this towards the top of the S, as well as both gaps near the top and bottom rounding of the S as well. In 2023, an example of this coin was sold at auction, graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, and sold for the sum of $300. varieties you can look for from the 1949 penny. Our first port of call is the Denver Mint, where we can locate a rather pleasing repunched mint mark variety in the form of this 1949 D over D coin. This coin is actually a triple punched mint mark, to be precise. In a coin that is still in a nice early die state, you can clearly see that the initial D mint mark was struck into the northeast, with a fair amount of separation too. The secondary D mint mark was then impressed slightly towards the south of the primary impression. The best place to spot this is to look at the serifs of the D, both towards the top and bottom. You should see clear notching, not unlike a coin that has experienced offset hub doubling in this way, but here the mint mark was simply repunched, clearly indicating that there were three distinct punchings of the D mint mark. Now, if we look at a coin that is both in a lower grade and a much later die state, then the second impression becomes a lot more difficult. Not impossible, mind you, but certainly more challenging to identify. However, the initial punching, the one made towards the northeast with the strong separation, remains extremely clear throughout, so you can definitely count on that. Now, in terms of value, a beautifully toned PCGS graded example was sold at auction in 2023 as PCGS MS66 Red for the sum of $504. From there, we can then head over to the San Francisco Mint for a very interesting doubled obverse variety, and a case of the much less frequently encountered design hub variety. Now, there is some additional thickness on the letters of "In God We Trust," but that is definitely not the main feature for this variety. Here, the main attraction is the fact that a blunt top 4 was impressed over top a pointed 4, giving us this very distinctive variety. There is also some more subtle spread on the 1 of the date, but the 4 is really the main point of interest. And here again, condition or even die state has very little to no impact on identifying the variety. The thickness on the eyelid and the letters of "In God We Trust" all remain. The doubling on the 1 in the date does become a little harder to spot, but the 4 remains the same, with the top clearly showing the difference. In 2024, a PCGS graded MS67 Plus Red example of this coin was sold at auction for the amount of $3,487. And then, for the sake of completeness, if nothing else, there is also a repunched mint mark variety from the San Francisco Mint known for this year. This is not a very well-known or widely sought-after variety, and as a result, the value will remain relatively low. But it is a clear S over S variety, with the initial impression taking place towards the west of the final S mint mark. Now, this coin is not listed in the current edition of the Cherry Picker's Guide, and as an indirect consequence, PCGS will not certify it as a variety. Anax and NGC fortunately do take a more enlightened approach and will happily do so. In 2017, an Anax graded example of this coin was sold at auction, graded as MS65 Red for the spectacular amount of $33. A couple of old steel pennies recently sold for over $500,000. But why are these coins worth so much to collectors, and more importantly, how can you tell if you might have one of these in your collection? Well, the best place to start this coin story is probably around 1941, a full 3 years before it was actually struck, where the domino pieces that led to the creation of this coin steadily being put into place. The conflict in Europe had now been raging for nearly full 2 years, but the United States had, at least officially, remained neutral up to this point. However, for the Roosevelt administration, it seems that the writing was on the wall, and the Supply Priorities and Allocation Board was created to track mining, production, and supply of especially gasoline, rubber, copper, nickel, and other crucial resources that would be needed for the production of ships, aircraft, shell casings, and the like. The US Mint was notified that their supply of copper, tin, and nickel would become restricted, and that they would have to find ways to severely curtail or eliminate altogether the use of these metals. With that, a series of experiments began at the Mint to try and eliminate primarily the use of copper as well as tin to produce the Lincoln penny, although the Jefferson nickel was also affected by this, and hence the silver wartime nickels that came about later on. The initial efforts, however, focused on producing a stainless steel penny, but this was soon proved to be futile, and from there it spiraled out into a dizzying array of experimental coins, including a tin alloy penny, a copper weld experiment, aluminium, as well as brass coins, to more outlandish trials including impregnated paper, zinc alloys, resin, glass, as well as a wide array of different plastics were all tested in an attempt to find a replacement for the copper penny. Several of these coins have come to market over the years, including an experimental amber glass cent from 1942 that was authenticated and graded by PCGS as Proof 64 and sold at auction in 2017 for $70,500. The dies used to create most of these experimental coins were created by John Sinnock, the chief engraver of the US Mint at that time, and used the obverse design that was copied from the Colombian 2 centavo coin, featuring the right-facing bust of Colombia, or Liberty, if you will, same difference really, with the words liberty and justice at either sides and the date below. The reverse die was instead adopted from a Washington memorial medalette from around 1860, keeping only the reef and replacing the epithet inscription on that piece with the words United States Mint in 3 lines. This was done to avoid the possibility of fraud by outside contractors and any possible chance of mistaking the experimental coins with an actual circulating coin of the day. But eventually, through all of this, the Mint settled on zinc-coated steel planchets to replace the copper and tin used in wheat cents. This freed up several tons of copper for production in 1943, by which time the US had officially joined the war in an effort to defeat the Axis powers of Japan, Germany, and Italy, as well as their allies. And so, in 1943, the steel penny was officially put into circulation. But not everyone was exactly happy about it. In fact, one of the most common complaints received was the fact that, when new, the steel cent was easily mistaken for a new silver dime instead by the absent-minded. And in fact, the Mint itself was not even immune to this mistake, as several silver cents were accidentally minted as well, where a silver dime planchet was struck in a penny press. One just such a coin was sold in 2013, graded by NGC as AU50 for $15,275. There were even supposed attempts by the Mint to resolve this issue by darkening the steel cent, using chemical treatments or deposits of antimony in the zinc alloy. But these trials proved to be unreliable, expensive, and ultimately remained unadopted on a larger scale. The 3 working mints of Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco would then go on to strike over $1 billion of these steel cents in 1943, with almost 685 million of those alone coming from Philadelphia, before then returning to the usual bronze coins again in 1944. As an interesting aside, and a way to bring back the story full circle in a way, was the fact that a number of spent shell casings were actually delivered to the Mint to be melted down and turned into coins. This would be the case for the next several years. Some of these coins were picked out and then kept as special souvenirs. So Now the US Mint was making pennies from copper once again, but they still had a large amount of zinc-coated steel planchets left over from 1943. Most of these would end up being used to strike coins for foreign countries, like the Belgian 2-franc coin for 1944. Almost 25 million of them, in fact. But as is so often the case during times of transition, errors do in fact occur, and just like the copper pennies that were inadvertently struck in 1943, steel cents were created by accident during 1944. As a matter of fact, the only known bronze, or shall we say copper, 1943 penny from the Denver Mint was sold at auction in early 2021, graded by PCGS as MS64 for a total of $840,000. The working theory is that some of these steel planchets were simply stuck in the tote bins used to feed the minting press with blank planchets, and when the next year's copper planchets were then dumped in, the older blanks simply got knocked loose and were then minted as usual. A coin like this, again from the Denver Mint, was sold in 2016, graded as MS62 by PCGS for $54,050. Which then finally brings us to the two coins I spoke of right at the beginning of this video. The first is a 1944 steel cent transitional era coin from the Philadelphia Mint. Now, because the Belgian 2-franc coins were also being produced at Philadelphia, it is plausible that some of those blanks found their way into the penny press by accident. Philadelphia certainly has the largest amount of these era coins known, with 25 to 30 coins estimated to exist today. This is a stark contrast to the only 7 coins that are known with the D Mint mark from Denver. This coin is tied for the finest known at a grade of PCGS MS64 and sold for the amount of $108,000 at auction. And just to illustrate what a dramatic impact the grade and condition of a coin can have on its value, there was another 1944 steel cent, also from Philadelphia Mint, featured at the exact same auction. This coin, though, only has a details grade of VF for environmental damage, as you can clearly see. It sold on its turn for $13,200. Still not bad, but a far cry from over $100,000 to be sure. Then we have the highlight of the presentation, the 1944 S zinc-coated steel Lincoln cent coin, also the finest known at a grade of MS66 from PCGS. But this one is one of only 2 known examples of this era coin with the S mint mark from the San Francisco Mint. The other coin was last seen in an NGC slab graded as XF40 when it sold at auction in 2018 for $49,200. But the coin that we all came here to see is the MS66, formerly a part of the Simpson collection that sold at auction for $408,000. Subscribe to WNN and activate notifications with the bell icon to know when new videos are released. For the World Numismatic News, I am Numisman saying thank you for watching, stay safe, keep collecting, and have a fantastic day.